Building the Web's Memory, Clara Tsao on Filecoin's mission to democratize data storage. In this episode, Dr. Gemma Green sits down with Clara Tsao, founding officer of the Filecoin Foundation, who's transforming how we preserve and access information online. Clara shares her journey from combating disinformation in government to creating the world's largest decentralized storage network, spanning exabytes of data across thousands of providers. From preserving historical archives to making data storage more affordable and transparent, they explore how blockchain technology is addressing information inequality while giving users true ownership of their digital footprint. I'm your co-host Anthony Pearl, and whether you're an investor or a startup looking for insights, it's time to get unblocked. Let's start by introducing Clara and allowing you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Yes, happy to. My name is Clara Tsao. I'm founding officer of the Filecoin Foundation. We are the world's largest decentralized storage network, and we think a lot about data today and what data looks like in the future, and making sure that the ownership of data we access on the web really belongs back in the hands of users. And so that's why a lot of us building on the Filecoin ecosystem are passionate about this mission of where data goes.
Amazing. And I mean, you've been working in government, very high levels, tackling some of the more complex challenges around disinformation and things like digital safety. Could you tell us a little bit about what drew you from that into the world of Web3 and Filecoin?
Yeah, actually, it's been on a similar mission. I think my whole life, I've been very passionate about solving inequality in this world, which is a very large problem set. The older I got, I realized maybe the internet and solving inequality in the internet is a better form of problem solving, because you only have so many hours and so much resources at hand to solve a large problem like that. Ultimately, I narrowed it down to information inequality. Today, when we have access to information, or for those that do not, it really carries a lot of weight into how people choose their careers, how people choose their academic pursuits. A lot of it is siloed information access that with the early onset of the internet really opened up all these opportunities for people that didn't know before. And so I spent the early part of my career actually in ed tech, because if you can actually imagine expanding educational access through all kinds of mediums to people, that felt very important and mission aligned to me. I spent many years also looking at the worst sides of the internet. So from homegrown extremism in the US and how terrorists might use the internet to recruit and radicalize people to join invisible wars like ISIS did back in the early 2010s, all the way to what has happened in the last few years, which is this era of online disinformation and misinformation, deep fakes, and sometimes even the lack of someone to tell whether something is an AI or a bot. And for me, the thing that is most important when you think about how to verify and have access to high quality information is actually the ability to check the source of data and prove that it came from a person, a thing, or whatever source it said it came from. And that's one of the biggest challenges for me when I was in US government, was seeing that firsthand and realizing that there actually aren't that many solutions that can really solve this until you really solve it at the data layer. And so with Filecoin and IPFS, we actually look at data in a very different way, because we think about it at the very storage layer instead of all the data belonging in one server, belonging to one company, or maybe just three in the US. You can actually have a lot more ownership in how you store, but also the way you store is actually, rather than by content address, you actually store by hash. And so that piece of data will never get lost. If you've ever encountered a 404 error on the web, that's often happens because someone doesn't pay the bill and that document gets lost. And in fact, I think the average lifespan of a website is just 2.5 years. So for me, coming into blockchain was really around the properties of crypto itself. How do you actually verify and also remove intermediaries in between that might actually end up intercepting with information, and making sure that, especially from the content integrity side, that's really what drew me back in. I actually did get exposed to blockchain back in 2012, 2013. So I have been in the space for some years, but the technology really didn't really come into tangible means until the last few years when you see a lot of builders and a lot more innovation happen across the crypto ecosystem. And it's been amazing to see all kinds of innovation happen in the blockchain space today.
Definitely. And in terms of Filecoin's database, is it used like traditional databases? You just mentioned some alternatives. Like, I guess we've got, Wayback Machine, which kind of captures older websites, and this is an alternative for that. What are the bigger use cases that people and organizations are using Filecoin for? And are they analogous to existing use cases or new ones?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of use cases for decentralized storage that today, if you were comparing storage to your experience using a Dropbox, a Google Drive, I think are actually way more interesting. One of them is this concept of data DAOs. A lot of large companies might have terabytes of data. They may not want to be the single owner of that data. You even see this sometimes in mandatory reporting in the healthcare space where certain companies have to co report and then one company gets stuck with the bill. We also had instances like conservation groups that were recording animal noises in the wild, and they might be actually fearful that if they accidentally capture human data, they might be subject to lawsuit, especially if it's community generated information gathering. So there are so many instances where today you can imagine the liability of how we use data and some of the policies around it might not actually serve some of the greater good that people might have at hand. The instance you gave about the Wayback Machine is a great one where a lot of people also don't realize how fragile the web is, that websites do go down. And so the Wayback Machine is a great example of a partnership we have with the Internet Archive, where we're backing up every single page on the web and also making sure there's a redundant copy on the decentralized web. And these are so important because, unfortunately, in certain countries around the world where the internet can actually be easily censored by dictators, that freedom of access to information from a human rights standpoint might be very limited in ways that might be hard for you and I to experience. But, there's journalists and a lot of human rights groups that we've worked with that have to deal with these kinds of challenges every day. And so those are the moments where I think you see a lot more use cases that today it's not just swapping out AWS or a Google Drive for an alternative. It's actually way more than that. And it's also the ability to preserve your privacy for data the way you want to. Sometimes for other companies, it's the lack of feeling like you are getting golden handcuffs and cuffed to a particular company for life. Today, if you've used any cell phone provider and then you have Apple or Google, it's really hard to not pay the storage bill every month. And sometimes that amount of data just increases. And so a lot of people want to be able to fully feel like they can own the data versus having to pay a third party to get their own data back that they've produced. So I think those are a couple of instances. I think when the rise of AI, which is a hot topic these days, with almost everyone every day using AI in some form in their lives already, people are being much more personal to AI than they would to normal search back in the day. And a lot of times people may not want what they might use their AI as a therapist or their deepest, darkest secrets for search to be necessarily harvested for advertising. So there's so many different properties that I think make it really interesting. We're also going to see a rise in AI agents communicating to other AI agents. And there's also this question of where is the data going to be stored when there's actually no intermediary? And that's something that we're thinking about a lot too, is being that storage layer that can also verify and store new kinds of data that a lot of large companies today may not even be thinking about. At the end of the day, accuracy in AI comes from being able to analyze large amounts of data. And that's something that we've already done the last few years. And we really want to make sure that open access to being able to store access and also provide all kinds of compute on top of that is accessible to everyone, not just a rare few.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you just said there, because a few hours ago today, I got a phone call and there was a slight delay and it sounded like a human voice. And then I very quickly worked out that it was an AI. And it did make me think about what's the information that I'm giving over. And certainly, I definitely did not get my email address. I wanted to see if it would, but waited for the email. It didn't come. And so it's actually interesting how accurate it is, even for the people at the other end.
Yeah, absolutely. It's becoming harder and harder to often tell who you're talking to from a customer service hotline when you're in a chat room, or whether that's sometimes these videos I've seen even generated today. I've seen very good advertisements that are completely AI generated, and people have also been able to manipulate their photographs. The last organization I started before co-founding the Filecoin Foundation was the first professional association in the trust and safety space. So I actually just flew back this morning from TrustCon, which is the largest gathering of trust and safety professionals. And we were talking about all these challenges that major platforms and companies are facing today, from this idea of sextortion, right? When you have public images online of your face, there's so many ways that you can weaponize it. You can put it on different bodies. And there's a lot of implications from what kids have to deal with from a bullying standpoint, all the way to what at some point is that face actually yours and your right to own it versus something that has been now been manipulated, looks like you, but may not be fully under your ownership. And those are the kinds of questions that I think are especially important for our society to grapple with, but also having the right way to actually verify and prove the instances to change data over time. I think that issue is going to be more important than ever. And that's something that we're able to do on the Filecoin network today in the way that we store. So we're also thinking about the way that we're seeing the landscape transform and how we can also help with all kinds of situations for verifying and authenticating content.
In terms of the adoption of the Filecoin system, like how big is it? Could you give the listeners a bit of a sense of how much adoption you've had?
Yeah, so early on in the Filecoin network, we were able to build a network of over 4.1 exabytes of available storage. It's, for those that don't know, exabytes, it's a lot of storage. And we did this in a much shorter time frame than what you could imagine centralized providers like AWS were able to do. We did it in less than, a year and a half, 2 years. A lot of what we did early on the network is really recruit a large network of entrepreneurs. You can imagine them like Airbnb hosts. You have extra space and you want to host and offer your space to other people. And no difference, we have a lot of people that care a lot about providing infrastructure, and they're building their own data centers all around the world. So we have close to anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 storage providers all around the world, independently running their own data centers and then building on top of the Filecoin network. And just like Airbnb that doesn't own any of the homes, we don't own any of the data centers, but we very much help them create open and free marketplace where they can offer storage of all kinds. Storage is actually a very diverse vertical. I think a lot of people only think about storage in their day-to-day consumer use case, but there's probably 18 different sub-verticals of storage. Everything from large archival data sets where you're maybe not going to access at frequent times. Sometimes, films often have a hard time being preserved and stored, all the way to hot storage. So Web3 object storage, for example, might include NFTs and different kinds of ways to store even new kinds of data that we're seeing in the blockchain space. We've done chain archival storage of other blockchain networks. We recently worked with Avalanche. We've worked with Cardano. We've also backed up Solana's entire ledger history. There's also a number of use cases in just Web2 object storage, and this is much more what you might be familiar with, that drag and drop model of a Dropbox or Google Drive experience. We have companies like Fleek that offer web hosting. So they're a little bit like WordPress, but instead of hosting to a centralized server, you can obviously host to the Filecoin network. So we're open source. We're very transparent about everything that we do. Every time someone wants to make an update to the network, they have a community vote. And so for us, those are really good qualities that show transparency to our community, not only for those that are building on it, but also those that want an alternative to store. And so I would say we're a little bit operationally like a mix between the Mozilla and Linux Foundation, where we really try to provide grants, infrastructure for the broader network for Filecoin, but also we have kind of an activist side too, to making sure that we can get the best kind of information free and public to those that need it. We also have a lot of grants that we've given over the years because, again, of our large amount of storage capacity to nonprofits and great groups that really have a hard time storing their data otherwise. So this might include the Flickr Foundation, which if you guys remember back in the day, Flickr was this early homepage of all the photographs. And we have a whole database of what we're preserving with the Flickr Foundation to make sure there's a commons and archive for that. We also have working with groups like the Smithsonian. We just backed up Alexander Graham Bell's archives. So there's a lot that we're doing in addition to what we've previously mentioned already about the Internet Archive and backing up the web.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of people forget that today data costs are actually very, very high. Even academic researchers, you might be doing a large genomic sequencing experiment and you suddenly end up with an AWS bill of $100,000 a month, right? And then at some point, you might have to throw away some of that data. One thing that's really great about what I just said about the properties for decentralized storage is that ability to verify. And so imagine you're working with a scientist in Europe and you're from the UC Berkeley lab. You want to make sure you're not using the wrong data set. And you can actually in real time verify that, especially when it comes to large amounts of data. That's another really great use case of what we're seeing in the decentralized science realm of how do we do experiments that can be verified and doing it with huge amounts of information. So just a couple of illustrations, but we definitely are very passionate about supporting all kinds of groups and especially those that may not normally be able to store as much data that are trying to do something good for this world. We definitely
Mhm.
have been hand in hand in helping those efforts.
Got it. For the more commercial use cases, how does the cost of using Filecoin compare to other cloud storage solutions?
Yeah. So, like I said, it's an open marketplace. And just like differences might change for commodities that you use every single day, it's hard to say there's a fixed price, but definitely there's an operation cost that every single storage provider around the world operates on. And usually they're the ones that set the price for the market. I would say, on average, for large archival storage, we see costs being a fraction of what they would normally be for Amazon Glacier. When it comes to hot storage, over time, our network has become way more efficient. I would say early on, the network probably was a little more expensive actually to look at hot storage options. But this year, we've launched proof of data possession and all these new innovations on the Filecoin network that has actually made it much more affordable and cheaper to experiment and build on top of Filecoin. So again, all our storage providers around the world, they're the ones that actually set the price for their customers. We also have a number of startups that are building we call storefronts. They're really the user experience layer of storing all kinds of specialty data. For example, NFT storage stores NFTs. And so a lot of times they're also the ones that kind of dictate, hey, this is the price that we see people are willing to pay for and the price that we want to set. So it really comes down again to the type of data you're storing. But I would say, like, in many cases, we're much cheaper. In other cases, I would say the properties we offer long term, a lot of people have been gravitating towards because they see it as much more price stability. This past year, with a number of tariffs hitting, especially from the US, this idea of, if you just add 3 to 4% to cloud infrastructure costs coming from the US, it's a big bill for everyone that relies on storage costs. And so decentralized storage is a great option too in terms of times of economic headwinds where you don't necessarily want to feel like, you have to pay to one country when there's turbulence in what the price could be.
I know even at a small business level that the cost of storage is significant, relatively speaking. And, most businesses would feel like, well, the choices are Google or Dropbox.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, like, this was not always the case. I would say probably 15, 20 years ago, if you were to lose your phone in the pool, I think the idea of you really wanting to make sure your phone was backed up was not as critical. But today we're seeing more and more people rely on their backups, rely on their data for just day to day function of their lives. And I think this is why you see people willing to pay a lot more. But at the same time, there's a cost of paying, right? Because you're just accumulating all that data. And it's really hard to not only manage it, but also if it's critical data, feel like you can afford to store it. And so for us, it's just offering this separate economy system that isn't always dictated by monopolies that on whim may just want to increase value to their shareholders, and they just dictate the price. Having an open, transparent, and marketplace like network gives consumers so much more choice for how they store, and also helps a lot of businesses and companies, but also nonprofits be able to have a lot more optionality than sometimes what feels like there is no choice today.
Gotcha. When you mentioned Avalanche before, and I saw you recently announced a partnership to build a cross chain data bridge. Could you talk to us about what's so significant about that? What does it provide?
Yeah, so we went and announced a partnership with Avalanche C Chain. This is really great because over the last few years, we launched Filecoin Virtual Machine, and this really allows us to actually build applications with other protocols in the blockchain space. Avalanche is definitely one of them, and this allows us to be able to very easily store any kind of application that builders on the Avalanche network want to back up on Filecoin. And instances like these that really allow us to make that access of decentralized storage just one step closer and easier to feeling seamless, like they're using a normal storage network, but also making sure that they can really do it in a decentralized way. So those are just a few examples. We have a couple of exciting other announcements later this year as well, similar to that effect. But it's been really great to also elevate the broader crypto community with optionality in decentralized storage. There's also a number of companies that are also building on the Filecoin network that also are working with Avalanche, like Akave. So they actually were a company that came out of the Filecoin ecosystem, and it's also been great to see them collaborate with Avalanche even closer. They just launched Akave Cloud, which is built through the Filecoin ecosystem, but also very closely with the Avalanche community.
So would you say that you're a kind of layer two for Avalanche?
I would say companies in our network can be layer twos for other ecosystems as well, because you imagine Filecoin as infrastructure, right?
Mhm.
And we really became a more full-fledged layer one with Filecoin Virtual Machine that was announced around a little bit over 2 years ago, I think at this point, a year and a half ago. But I think it allows us to be able to offer that entire marketplace of innovation to be built on top, right? So there's a lot of companies today that I don't think we would have even thought about at the Filecoin Foundation or in the sibling company that helped write the Filecoin white paper, Juan Benet, with Protocol Labs. There's so much from companies that allow you to back up your phone data on the Filecoin network to all these other kinds of innovations, like how do we make sure that data centers can be completely solar powered? I think that's the really beauty of a two-sided marketplace and having an innovation marketplace of applications, whether those are L2s or startups building on top of Filecoin, or whether those are from the storage provider side of people innovating for how to even run data centers, how to think about combining not just storage, but also compute and GPUs.
Mhm.
And that's something that we've also done with other projects like Aether and a few other deepen projects to not only think about the storage layer, but also think about shared GPU and compute that is all part of the AI stack that we're seeing in the future.
Gotcha. If you look at other L1s in terms of what they've done to get more mainstream adoption, and what would you say like Filecoin is focused on to similarly get that same kind of mainstream adoption? Like, is it something around like incentives or user experience or like the kind of products and the core customers that you're targeting?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say the number one priority actually for our ecosystem is helping all the builders and startups accelerate their journey to product market fit. Because, like I said, we're kind of competing against the Goliaths that have been in the storage space for some time. I would say, actually, to break down what other crypto networks are doing versus ourselves, it is tricky because I truly think the strongest product market fit adoption for just broader crypto is in the decentralized finance space, right? People are just trading currencies
I agree.
or people are just investors in it. And for us, our mission has been very much from the beginning not necessarily that as our main focus, but specifically on making an alternative to how we see internet infrastructure. And so a lot of times I feel like I'm sometimes speaking to three different audiences. I'm speaking one to the internet activist kind of community of people that want that alternative, that are the earliest adopters of different technologies that have come out of our network, like IPFS and Filecoin. I'm speaking to an audience that is really traditional infrastructure providers that are building the data centers, that really actually some of them may not be fully blockchain native even, but they're just so passionate about building better architecture. And some of them are really enterprise nerds that really see the future on the infrastructure side. And then the third bucket is really the crypto and blockchain community. There's been a lot of smart people that really find the research in decentralized storage fascinating, and they've been really attracted to it. There's a lot of people that love our developer community. I think one of the most active GitHub accounts in all of the blockchain space in terms of the amount of activity in our network. We have a really smart network of different kinds of developers that are building different elements of the Filecoin network at all times. But I think there's also this sense of feeling misunderstood because the general community that doesn't know Filecoin too deep, they're just looking for splashy updates for what is that new thing, because we're not in the weeds of thinking about it more like an infrastructure network. What is that next thing that's going to make the token price rise, right? So I do want to separate between the three, because when you think about mainstream adoption, unfortunately, a lot of where we've seen the most of mainstream adoption has been entirely in the decentralized finance space, where people at the end of the day, their motive is to make money. You can also argue, today, if you own an NFT, you're already using Filecoin and IPFS. Most NFTs today are stored on Filecoin. So there's a lot of people that might use it. And for us, it's actually better that they're not even aware, because that's when we know we have adoption and true utility, is when people have that experience feel seamless. So I think sometimes for us, especially in the blockchain and Web3 community, is just awareness, because often we're maybe communicating to, our network or to other communities or even to policymakers. And the crypto community also wants certain kinds of updates at all times. And this is why being able to collaborate with so many different companies has been really exciting for us, because especially I would argue in the decentralized AI space, where we're seeing a lot more infrastructure having a spotlight in crypto this year, I think that is a huge opportunity for people to also see it in a light of, their fears for what today the lack of transparency and a lot of major monopolies owning the AI stack is causing. And a lot of great people are thinking about ways to decentralize the future of how we're going to all communicate, which is through different kinds of AI means, whether it's AI agents at the top level or it's the training data to make sure that that is verified and used in a way that is representative of key information. Sometimes it's, the future of what we think about as physical AI. When we think about robots or self-driving cars, all of that also runs on data, and all that data has to be stored somewhere, right? And so a lot of people want transparency, as we're seeing much more of an open ecosystem that's all powered by AI.
As we wrap up part one of the discussion on how Filecoin is revolutionizing data ownership and preserving historical archives, part two of our conversation with Clara Tsao delves deeper into the sustainability aspects of decentralized storage. Join us as Clara shares insights on solar-powered data centers, Filecoin's partnerships in the AI ecosystem, and how her background in national security and countering disinformation shaped her vision for a more transparent digital future. We'll also discuss how decentralized infrastructure can address the massive energy demands of modern technology while creating economic opportunities in regions traditionally left behind by tech innovation. Don't miss this thought-provoking continuation of our discussion on the future of data storage and ownership. This podcast was produced by Podcasts Done For You. We look forward to your company next time on Unblocked.